Welcome to Module 10, everyone. Uh, in this video, as usual, I'll be going over discussion board reactions pretty briefly, but then I'll be talking a little bit about the final project as well as some announcements about that will be forthcoming. And then I'll be going over solution-focused and narrative theory in counseling. All right, so to start with discussion board reactions. So better work this week with addressing Nicole with more specifics, particularly in how the role of Nicole and the counselor are influenced by theory, in addition to the interventions and techniques that could be used from like the theoretical lens and how applying them specifically with Nicole looks. So good work on that. I felt like some themes, there are multiple, but some themes that surfaced for me as I was reading through all the discussion posts is the emphasis on empowerment. That feminist and relational cultural theory is really about empowering people to kind of relinquish the power that's being imposed and kind of finding an inner sense of power. And so obviously power analysis goes along with that too. That seemed to be a pretty common intervention that was addressed, and how to specifically apply power analysis could kind of look different based on each person. But the core principle is that it's like really being thoughtful of not just uncritically like integrating societal beliefs and perspectives, but really being thoughtful of deconstructing those and kind of pushing back on those, like where are these power dynamics and these messages coming from. So yeah, I felt like that was helpful to acknowledge, as those are kind of central constructs to relational cultural theory and feminist theory. I just wanted to acknowledge that it's probably noticeable to some of you that I'm less engaged on the discussion boards now. I still read all of them and I still reflect on your statements, but I've kind of part of my emerging approach with the discussion boards is that, usually at the start of the term, I'm a little bit more active to kind of be modeling some ideas of how you can use the discussion board. But then later in the term, like I trust you all. You all seem to be settling into a pattern of being able to support each other, question each other, also kind of being thoughtful of your posts at the start. So once again, that's kind of my intention there, is to really kind of honor you all and engaging with each other. And I'll still jump in here and there with a few questions or a few reflection points. The last thing that I wanted to mention about the discussion board is remember the due dates. The original post and the peer posts are due on different days. So if you post it all on the same day, as per the rubric, some points will be reduced. So just make sure that you're following the rubric and the due dates for both the original post and the peer posts. Okay, so just briefly on the final project, the personal model of counseling paper or presentation. I'll be making a video probably later today and releasing it as an announcement to the class to go over some of the expectations. So be expecting that. And I'm going to make a small but important update to the assignment prompt in the syllabus. So in the syllabus, it's a little too vague. So for example, like so the personal values and counseling reflection paper that you just finished has similar prompts about, going over, how you view people, how change occurs, how problems develop, etc. And those are also going to be in your personal model of counseling paper. But the difference is, and this is the update that I'm going to make to the syllabus to make it clearer, is that I want you to use a theoretical lens to answer those questions, not as much just based on your personal experience or just perspectives up to this point, but like from a theoretical model that you choose, how would you answer those questions? So for example, person-centered theory would view how problems develop very different than feminist theory, or very different than CBT. So you're gonna still, like, you're describing it in your own words, but you're really integrating theory into how that theoretical lens answers those questions. So I'll go into that a bit more in the video, but I wanted to highlight that now. So now I'm gonna jump into solution focused and narrative. All right, so solution focused and narrative theories are what I'm going to address at this point. So before I jump into that, I just want to re-highlight postmodernism. I brought that up earlier in the semester, but just as a reminder, uh, postmodernism is basically this belief that reality is constructed, truths are social constructions, that there aren't any like fully absolute truths. There's just constructed contextual truths for an individual or for a group. So that becomes very important because both of these approaches they're philosophically founded in postmodernism. So the idea that the language we use and the relationships we develop that or that influence our constructions, that's really central to these approaches. So I'll start with solution focused. So some of the core constructs is that solution focused is very much a present and future focused approach that's brief, that really emphasizes being short and brief and really targeted to specific changes that the clients want to make. So therefore, it's very goal oriented rather than kind of process oriented. As can be mentioned, so the emphasis is on solutions rather than kind of becoming problem saturated. It's the solution orientation that if we choose to focus, talk about, move towards solutions, then that will construct a life that is, moving towards those solutions. So therefore, what we emphasize is what we move towards, and what we talk about, or how we talk about something becomes our reality. And so one thing that's kind of a challenge to a lot of these approaches is that knowing why the problem exists isn't necessarily important in this approach. It's, where do you want to be moving towards? What are the solutions? So the counselors, you'll see in the video demonstration that they don't necessarily avoid talking about, challenges. Like they're still using the core counseling skills of, the reflective listening, reflecting feelings, paraphrasing, reflecting meaning, like those are still there. But then the emphasis, the shift is usually pretty quickly back to solutions. So the idea is that the counselor and the client are crafting solution-focused narratives to the problems. So the problem is like they try to target the problem pretty quickly and then move towards, okay, what are the avenues to work through this? And exception finding is very important. So finding exceptions to the problem, the client might come and think that or talk as if the problem is always present. But then the counselor can kind of inquire about when have you not been struggling with this problem? When have you, like if the client's very depressed, like when are you less depressed? Might be some of these questions to start to find even if they're small moments, where are those moments that are exceptions to this problem? Because that means that there's already something that's working. So it's once again, it's trying to honor the client and finding solutions that work for them. In this approach, the idea is that these small changes, these small solutions lead to larger changes. And some of the techniques of this there's lots of questions usually in solution focus. So in the video demonstration, it'll talk about, exception questions, the miracle questions, scaling questions are used. Homework's often utilized as well. And sometimes, the counselor will even kind of give compliments and suggestions for moving forward. So just right out of pre-prac, this might sound kind of different to some of the messages that you just got. But once again, like even the groups that I worked with, I was very kind of specific about no questions or very limited questions. But this approach really embraces those. So it's just kind of a different philosophical framework. So those are some of my quick thoughts on solution focused. So now I want to shift over to narrative. There's going to be some interconnecting factors. So similar to solution focused, narrative has this idea that the stories we tell ourselves create our lived experience, create our perception of the world and, our reality. So stories are very emphasized. So the counselor basically is listening for stories and listening for the strengths and the resources in the client in those stories as well. Like once again, the natural inclination for some clients will be to focus on the problem saturated narratives, but the counselor kind of helps the client find strengths in the narratives, finds their values in the narratives, finds their pathway forward in reconstructing their narrative, which I'll talk about in a moment. So in general, the narrative approach kind of has this idea of the clients are likely unconsciously already following an inner narrative for their life. So they have a constructed narrative that maybe is unconsciously built, but it's there. So part of the counseling process is to start to listen for what is the narrative that this client is working from? What's the foundational story? Like, so the story might be, I'm not good enough. So that's the story that the client is continuing to tell themselves over and over again, or that they feel society is telling them about themselves over and over again in a multitude of applications. But that's the core message. That's the core story. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. All these stories have the root message that that's the truth. So the counselor then works to help the client deconstruct that story. So part of that is just being able to recognize, oh, okay, where are these messages coming from? Maybe you heard these from early caregivers, or maybe from like societal message that you felt. So it's like kind of naming, where are these stories coming from? And that starts this process of deconstructing it, saying, okay, so you don't have to follow those stories. So it's almost like you're inviting the client to see their story from a new perspective. So that then moves towards, deconstructing the story, then moves towards this reconstruction of a new story that the client does want to tell themselves. That's much more conscious and in their awareness. And once again, that emphasizes strengths and resources. So in this approach, the counselor is seen as this collaborator, this co-investigator, a co-facilitator of this reauthoring process, and could be seen somewhat as like a co-author. Ultimately, that responsibility is in the hands of the client, but this co-authorship can be kind of really an intimate experience that requires a lot of. In the text, it talked about respect, trust, curiosity, honesty, empathy, and on page 384, even fascination. So those are kind of the dispositions that the counselor holds. So some techniques that are used in narrative is externalizing the problem, which is kind of an interesting thing. So the video demonstration does this. It gives examples. So I encourage you to keep watching all those video demonstrations. But basically, so the problem is then given a name, and the problem is talked about as if it was in the third person. So I'm trying to remember the exact name. I can't remember from the video off the top of my head, but so if there's maybe anxiety is what's struggled with, that could be given a name. The client decides what to call their anxiety. And what this does is it starts to give distance between the client and their anxiety, so that they are not their anxiety. Anxiety is something that's around them that they sometimes experience, that's almost like a cloud that moves across and is there sometimes. That might even be the name of in the video demonstration, like a cloud that's sometimes there, but then other times it's gone. So once again, the client isn't the problem. It's shifting the narrative and reconstructing this idea, this belief system that I don't have power over my narratives, to I do have power over it. Sometimes they impact me in ways that I don't like, and they don't always own me and control me. So it's almost like the counselor and client team up against that named problem. So once again, in this approach, there's lots of questions that are open-ended and exploratory, that aren't really trying to focus on the content of the story, but getting to the process. So an example of like a content question, like if the client's fighting with their sibling, it might be like, tell me about what you fought about with your sibling. So that is just like content, like on the surface of what's being talked about. So a process question would be like, how do you fight with your sibling? What's your role in that argument? So kind of getting more deeper into the story of the messages and their role in that place, can start to get more towards process. So once again, the narrative counselor is very thoughtful of their questions, and they're trying to really cut through to the core elements of the narratives that are being, like the core messages of the narratives. Once again, they'll also really emphasize finding strengths and finding exceptions, similar to solution focus. So, when is the problem narrative not there? When is maybe the cloud of anxiety not present? What's going well to lead to that? So this is very much like a strengths-based approach as well. Uh, to aid in re-authoring the story or reconstructing it, sometimes letters are even written. The client might even write a letter to themselves, their future selves, of how they've changed and how they envision their change process. They might use art to kind of depict what their life's like in their story right now and how they might like their story to look in the future. Even like sand tray elements could be utilized of like kind of building your world of the story of your world and how you'd like it to shift. And the counselor often uses letters as well. I believe it's Michael White and David Epstein uh, talk about writing letters to the client as a form of documentation. So instead of note taking, you write a letter to your client, kind of summarizing the story of the session with them. So those are a few ideas from both solution focused and narrative that I wanted to bring up at this point.